Hi, everyone. We're just going to start in about 2 minutes or a couple minutes, just waiting for folks to trickle in, and then we'll get started. All right. So as people are piling in, maybe we can do a round of quick introductions. So welcome, everyone. It's really great to have you joining us today. My name is Anya. I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of Diversio. Really excited to be doing one of our webinars. I don't always frequently get to do these, so I'm keen to have a conversation with you and sort of walk you through our topic today, which of course is inclusive culture and building inclusive culture within our organizations, what it means, how to do it, how to measure it, and what are the different metrics that fall under the inclusive culture umbrella. I'm joined today also by Bobby, who I'm going to pass over the virtual microphone to right now for a quick intro on his end.
Hi, my name is Bobby, as Anya kindly introduced me. I manage a lot of our client-facing work here at Diversio, and I'm just going to give a little bit of background of maybe our product and what we do here near the end of our presentation today.
Thanks
Cool.
so much, Bobby. Okay, so without further ado, we'll get started. Just some quick housekeeping things. The way that I really prefer to have these or hold these webinars is as interactive as possible. So we're going to be talking about one of our metrics today that we measure at Diversio, which is inclusive culture. But really, please feel free to ask any questions, or if there's anything in particular that your organization is prioritizing right now, or maybe a challenge that you're personally facing when it comes to DEI implementation at your organization, please throw it into the chat or the Q&A function in Zoom, and I will do my best to answer your question or to provide any context or feedback. Definitely something that want to be adding value during this conversation, as well as kind of walking you through the metrics that we're going to be discussing. So without further ado, I will get us started on our presentation. And can I get a thumbs up, Bobby? Can you see my screen right now? Okay, thanks. All right, so what are we going to be covering today? The first thing that we're going to be going over is what is inclusive culture and why it matters. So why we want to be building it into within our organizations. We're going to be looking at inclusive practices across an organization and what they entail. And then how to set up your long-term sustainability of DEI strategies. So ensuring that it is not just a one and done, but it's something that is pervasive throughout your organization and ultimately kind of extends beyond the HR function and across the entire workforce, with everyone bought in every department as a stakeholder. Then we'll end off with a bit of an overview of our company and what we do and how we can help. Of course, you don't need us to drive DI in your organization, but we can definitely assist if that's something that you're struggling with or something that you're looking for help with. And then we'll wrap up with the Q&A. So like I said, if you want to enter it into the chat or like just the Q&A generally, I'd be happy to answer any questions. Doesn't have to be about this topic. It can really be about anything. So the first thing that wanted to kind of look at when we're talking about inclusive culture is answer the question of what do we actually mean when we're talking about inclusion. So inclusive culture considers engagement, diversity, equity, and inclusion throughout all departments and decision making. The idea is that culture is something that goes top down as well as bottom up, in the sense that culture is something that can be set by policies and programs across your organization. So, from an infrastructure perspective, you need that kind of that foundational support to make all of your employees feel included. You also need that buy-in from leaders. You need leaders to set the tone in your organization. It's incredibly important. And you need leaders to model the behavior that you want the rest of your employees to embody when it comes to inclusivity across the organization. But at the same time, it has to come from the grassroots level as well. It can't be something that just lives in HR. Inclusive culture needs to be pervasive in the way that your employees interact with each other day to day, whether or not they're willing to support and help each other, whether or not they, lend a hand or give each other opportunities. So it really is this all-encompassing, almost holistic environment within your organization, which can be very difficult to achieve, of course. But when you do, it very much creates magic within the company. It really is from when it comes to a culture metric, from an inclusion perspective, it comes to that interpersonal interactions across your team. So how do they connect with their team members as well as with leaders? And of course, inclusive culture also really kind of extends to our underrepresented folks across the organization. So we want everybody to be feeling equally empowered, which means that we don't want any fundamental differences between how people experience the workplace. When we talk about exclusion, that's ultimately what we're talking about. We're talking about a systemic difference in how your employees experience the workplace around them. So, is any one particular group of employees having a fundamentally worse experience? Are they being excluded? That group of employees can be a quote unquote visible demographic. So for example, our Black employees in the organization, or our, Latin or Hispanic employees in an organization, or it can be a more invisible demographic. It could be employees struggling with a mental health, or those with potentially a disability. But nonetheless, that is a component where we need to make sure that all employees are included equally, and there's no pattern when it comes to exclusion. So what does an included employee look like? So not just from a culture perspective, but holistically across an organization, what does that look like when it comes to inclusion? First of all, foundationally, an employee needs to feel psychological and emotional safety at work. If you think of, and we have inclusion metrics that I will walk you through in a second, but if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of need, that workplace safety metric, that psychological, physical, emotional safety would be the foundation. If an employee is not feeling safe within the workplace, then there's nothing really else to talk about. They are not going to be able to feel included in any other facet. The next that next rung, that middle of the pyramid, is an employee is capable and is being supported of fulfilling their personal and professional obligations. That's that workplace flexibility component that we're talking about here. So they need to be able to really ensure that all of their needs are met from kind of a personal and professional perspective. They also need to know that their managers are fair towards them. So if you're a direct report to a manager or leader or supervisor, you need to make sure that employees feel like their managers are fair. That doesn't mean that managers can't be delivering constructive feedback. In fact, they should be if the employee wants to grow and develop in an organization. But it means that a manager is not biased against any particular employee or group of employees. And that's something that you can measure internally to understand. The next kind of facet of being included for an employee is that they receive transparent communication from leadership and they feel like they have a voice. So they need to really have that connectivity with leaders, and they need to feel like they're really bought into the mission of what an organization is doing, and they believe the things that are happening around them are working towards that mission. And then finally, of course, an employee is able to advance their career. This is kind of the pinnacle of that Maslow's hierarchy of need that I was talking about from a professional perspective. An employee needs to feel like they can succeed in an organization. They need to feel like they can advance, they can, become more senior, they can be and will be rewarded for their accomplishments. And that makes them more empowered and more motivated to continue working and continue investing into the responsibilities and the work that they're doing. So career development is one of those incredibly important facets, I would say, of the kind of inclusion framework. Just taking a look now, or taking a step around inclusion, of course, is something that we're talking about here today, but I think that it's important to also frame it in the context of the other terms that come up very frequently when we're talking about inclusion, which of course are diversity, equality, equity, and inclusion being the kind of all-encompassing last bit. When we're talking about inclusion can exist without diversity, but that's not what we're aiming for in our organizations. Diversity is necessary in order for us to reap the benefits of having alternating viewpoints around the table. So diversity is having those different perspectives of employees, whether it's employees who are from different socioeconomic backgrounds or different cultures, or different genders, different races. The idea is that we're bringing all sorts of different people together in our organization in order to improve the way that the organization performs. If everyone has a similar experience or a similar background, they're also more likely to have similar opinions. And ultimately, this is stifling to innovation, to entering new markets. It's not going to be conducive to thought diversity and to development of new products or what have you. That's why diversity is ultimately a business priority, because we want to be innovative. We want to have that competitive advantage. Inclusion is what's necessary in order to activate that diversity. If our diverse folks around the table are not able to speak up, or they're not able to contribute their viewpoints that are different than other people, then we're not going to benefit from having those people around the table. And so inclusion is what allows us to ensure that those individuals are actually able to contribute in a way that will drive the outcomes that we want. So contribute in a way that will drive productivity or revenue results, or what have you. Besides, of course, it just being the right thing to do. These are just fundamental business truths that make an investment in DEI that much more important. And then, of course, we have equality and equity. So ensuring that employees are treated the same, regardless of a background or circumstance, for equality. And then equity is understanding that potentially different people need a different sort of resources or investment in order to see them succeed. So, potentially accommodations for folks who might have a disability or different cognitive neurodiversity, as an example, providing this space for them to succeed differently, but succeed nonetheless at the same level that anyone else. And that's kind of where we get into the equity piece as well. Now, so at Diversio, maybe I'll kind of take a step back and I'll give a little bit of a context and background around our company. Is we are a technology platform predominantly that it also has a kind of a strong education and academic arm to it. So we actually developed our inclusion metrics that were the first academically validated way of measuring inclusion in an organization. This was done 5 years ago now with partners from universities and post-secondary institutions. So we work with the University of Toronto, the University of Waterloo, Dalhousie University, and a few others to build out this first academically validated way of measuring inclusion. So as you can see, inclusive culture is one of the metrics, with another 5 metrics here that I had that I went through at a high high level a couple of slides previously. These are the metrics that we need to be collecting data on in our organizations. These are the metrics that we need to be going out to our employees and pulling in information to understand how our company is performing on each one of these KPIs. The way that we recommend doing it at Diversio is by asking employees directly. So if you remember when we went through kind of the definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion, what we talked about is we need to understand who's at the table, so who is within our workforce, and we also need to understand what are their experiences. So this is data that we need to collect from employees directly. So some of you might be storing this in your HRIS platforms. Some of you might not have started collecting this data at all. But we really need to understand how are our employees feeling and who they are. And so a great way to do this is by going out to your employees and asking them. That's frankly, the only way that you're going to know this information for sure. And this can be done through a survey, or this can be done, through focus groups. Our preference is a survey just because it encompasses your entire workforce. So it gives you the most holistic understanding and overview of your employee base. And basically sending out a survey and sending data collection effort to understand from employees who they are, so their demographics, gender, race, like I said, disability, sexual orientation, and then how they're feeling on each one of these metrics. Then what we do is the recommendation is to disaggregate the information. So look at, when it comes to workplace safety, as an example, the metric that measures that psychological, physical safety within an organization, that foundation of the pyramid, if you're thinking of the Maslow's pyramid of needs, are all employees responding equally? If all of the white employees in our organization are saying, yes, the workplace is free from harassment, it's great, I'm really enjoying it. But are people of color saying, you know what, I've actually experienced some really disparaging comments, or I was harassed by my manager a couple of months ago? That's something that you need to lift out, and that's something that you need to hone in on and start addressing and fixing. And so each one of these metrics, as you see defined here, there are things that you need to pull in from your employees in order to understand the level of inclusion in your organization. And you need to start deep diving on them to understand, are there differences with how different employees are experiencing these metrics across your company? Now, deep diving on inclusive culture, which is here on the bottom left, and the metric that we're talking about today, there are some sort of sub pain points that we've discovered that roll up into inclusive culture that I just wanted to flag for you. So if inclusive culture is ultimately having this team environment of diverse opinions and perspectives without being judged, if inclusive culture is those interpersonal relationships between ourselves and our peers and our leaders, then there are things that roll up into inclusive culture that we need to assess and we need to make sure exist in order for our inclusive culture metric to be a high score. Sorry. And so, what does those sub metrics look like? So the first metric that kind of rolls into inclusive culture is collaborative teamwork. So collaborative teamwork essentially looks at cross-functional relationships between teams and across individuals of diverse backgrounds. So do our employees have an opportunity, and do they seek out diverse opinions from colleagues that are not like them? And so this kind of teamwork mentality is something that facilitates innovation and, kind of more sophisticated outcomes from a productivity perspective, but it also creates a sense of community within your organization, where employees are striving to work with each other. And so collaborative teamwork is incredibly important when it comes to building that inclusive culture metric and KPI. The next metric that falls under the inclusive culture sort of bucket is adequate resourcing. So this is fundamental, again, to have at an organization. And adequate resourcing essentially means that employees have what they need in order to perform the task and perform the work that they're supposed to be performing. We also need to be investing into bringing employees into our kind of organization in a more meaningful way. So adequate resourcing to support, for example, our initiatives such as ERGs, employee resource groups, creating, cultivating events across an organization's workshops, initiatives. So are we kind of investing in the culture within our organization? Because of course you need to invest into something in order for that thing to thrive, for that thing to grow and to really evolve within an organization. The next kind of a sub-metric from inclusive culture that we have is on inclusive leadership. So leaders, like I said previously, it is incredibly important for leaders to model the behavior that we want to see throughout our organization and throughout employees within our company. Leaders are the ones that set the tone for how everybody else in our organization will perform. And it's definitely not one of those things where you kind of say, do as I say, not as I do. You need to walk the talk. You need to have your leaders who are embodying those values. So the principles of inclusive culture ultimately underscore the significance of empathy, attentive listening, and cultivating an environment where employees are valued. So ensuring that our leaders are modeling this behavior is incredibly important. This can be done, and leaders can be trained on this, but this is something that needs to be a priority for you as potential, I'm assuming DI practitioners or DI leaders when cultivating this sense of inclusion in an organization. Employee engagement is this idea of regularly soliciting feedback through employees and engaging with them through surveys, through interactivity, talking to them and asking them how they're feeling. You need to be able to have that feedback loop in order to really benefit from that creation of the inclusive culture internally. And of course, respect and compassion is one of the other submetrics within inclusive culture, which is really developing clearer guidelines for respectful communication and interaction among employees. And that pertains to both within the office or within the work environment and outside of the work environment, where a lot of interactions between employees happen. And then, investing in education for employees for that particular submetric, you need to be kind of training employees how to do this. It's not something that you're necessarily going to have as a skill going in. And, it is a skill that needs to be developed, how to show up as an ally, how to be compassionate, how to build that empathy muscle. And that really goes to those peer-to-peer interactions. So how do you bring yourself to every single interaction is ultimately a huge component of that inclusive culture piece. And then so our last kind of component that we'll cover, and then maybe I'll pass it off to Bobby and then we'll do a Q&A, is the sustainability of long-term DEI strategies. Once you have a plan, once you're bringing in these policies, programs, once you're, engaging with your employees, collecting data, understanding where you currently are, and then setting those goals for improvement on each one of the metrics, inclusive culture being one of them, how do you ensure that longevity? The idea ultimately is integrating a data strategy that will guide your action plan that you can refer to on an ongoing basis. So ultimately, what do we need to do is we need to set our baseline in an organization, understand where we currently are through our conversations with employees, through that pulling in that data, those data pieces, like I mentioned, through surveying, what have you. Once you understand where you are, identify those priorities. So, potentially could be reinforcing our policies, ensuring that they're equally widespread throughout the organization, establishing new programming that will be engaging to employees and start improving some of these metrics. implementing some best practices that goes hand in hand with the policy making, potentially establishing some resource groups or potentially establishing some activities for employees to engage in. Once we do all those things, it circles back to us remeasuring again, because ultimately what we don't want is kind of a black box where you're implementing programs and policies and you're not really sure whether or not they're having an impact. What you want at the end of the day is to be implementing activities or actions, and then have it refer back to the data that you collected to start with. You want to be seeing how are those experiences. So, for example, for our in our previous example, I mentioned that our white employees across the organization might be feeling safe and they might be feeling psychologically, secure, but our people of color were experiencing some degree of harassment. Once you establish programs and policies to address this issue, you want to recollect that data again. You want to resurvey in order to understand, have we moved the needle? Have we actually helped the group of people that we're intending to help? And ultimately it becomes this cycle where you're collecting the information, you're understanding what your status is at the moment, where your gaps are, you're interacting with those gaps by implementing programs and policies to address them. And then once you've had time for those policies and programs to take effect, you're reassessing again in order to make sure that you're actually changing the things that you're hoping to change. So without further ado, I'll pass it off to Bobby to maybe talk a little bit about how we can help you with some of these things, and then happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Amazing. Hi, everyone. So I'm going to walk you through a little bit about what we do here at Diversio. We are the world leader in DI collection and benchmarking. Diversio enables HR and DI teams, as well as investors, to retain talent and boost performance by creating a more inclusive company culture. Most companies we talk to say they don't know where to start or how to move the needle on their DI efforts at their company. The Diversio platform measures, tracks, and improves every employee's experience across our inclusion framework to deliver insights at scale, empowering teams to make people decisions based on data instead of opinions. How it works is we track across 5 metrics, as Anya previously mentioned, that we've developed in tandem with leading research universities here in Canada to measure how inclusive your organization is. We benchmark your results to your industry average using our own proprietary database and provide you a bird's eye view of employee engagement across various intersectional identities and even departments and roles. Using our own natural language processing algorithm, we're able to anonymize qualitative results, remove identifiers using AI, and securely store your data. Why DI and HR leaders love us is that we're experts at presenting you the what, your data in a seamless platform, but we also track to provide you the so what, how do we improve? We are equipped with over 1,500 built-in client-tested solutions to tackle identified challenges to increase your inclusion score. Next slide. And there are tangible benefits to ROI when companies do invest in DEI. We know that companies are 25% more profitable, and investments in DEI reduce employer attrition by over 23%. DEI is increasingly becoming mission critical to business success. When we have employees that don't feel included, businesses suffer from turnover costs and low productivity. So we work with some of the most innovative companies in the world, such as Microsoft, Deloitte, Amazon, and Unilever. We're deployed in over 30 countries, and we service over 500 plus clients across a broad range of industries. If you would like to know a little bit more about how diversity can help your organization, I'll be providing a link to my calendar where you can schedule a demo with one of our DI specialists who can be your partner in being a more informed and inclusive company. So thanks for all your time. I'm going to open up to Q&A with Anya.
Thanks so much, Bobby. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second and just see whether or not anyone has questions. Again, it doesn't have to be about what we talked about today. It can really be about anything. I saw that there was one person that had a question. It was answered in the Q&A, but maybe I'll elaborate a little bit. So Sarah, thanks for submitting a question. Sarah asked, I'm curious if you see more and more honest survey results when respondents are anonymous. Does this affect the results, or can you build the survey to capture the relevant information anonymously? So The first, okay, apologies, sorry about that. So the kind of the blanket answer, like the general answer is yes. Um, but it depends on two things. So whether or not you're collecting data yourselves or whether you're collecting data through a third party. So when you're collecting data yourselves within an organization, I would absolutely recommend doing it anonymously. Employees, when you're collecting data yourselves and you already have the kind of the raw responses, the individual level responses, employees definitely feel trepidation and possibly a lack of trust a lot of the time when it comes to submitting their genuine experiences as well as their genuine identities for a number of reasons. So, for example, of course, there's a lot of this information insensitive. So, for instance, questions around, sexual orientation or potentially even questions around disability is very sensitive because employees worry, will my benefits suffer as a result? Or there's lots of questions. And then, of course, on the experience side, employees sometimes are worried about retaliation, or they're worried about, being somehow punished for saying that they're not having the best experience ever. So from that perspective, there's a big barrier for you to overcome when it comes to ensuring that high response rate and that engagement from your employees if you're collecting data yourselves. So I would absolutely recommend doing it anonymously. That being said, if you're collecting data through a third party, we're finding, so a provider like us, we're finding that when we go into organizations, we typically start with anonymous data collection to build trust with the employees, but we see quite high response rates and we see quite high engagement from employees at this point because we've built a bit of a reputation around ourselves as, trusted diversity, equity, and inclusion provider. And so what we've recently started doing is we've actually started collecting data not anonymously. So we ask employees to share with us their ID or email. And the reason we started doing this as we're pulling in the data is, first of all, just to make the logistics of it simpler. We don't have to then ask employees their demographics every single time. We can just ask once and sort of store that. And if they want to update that information, they can, but it's a little bit lighter touch for them and avoid survey fatigue. But the second benefit to that is we're able to conduct additional analytics now on things like promotion rates, attrition rates, pay equity, and that's really helpful for organizations. If you, for example, want to understand what is the cost of not being inclusive, because if, for instance, we're finding that our women are, twice as likely to leave the organization, to resign than our men, and the reason being is that they're not feeling valued or included in the company, then that's a direct cost to the business. And so as HR practitioners, you would benefit from knowing this information because then you can directly relate the ROI, so the return on investment on certain programming to engage women if the attrition rates go down. But that's something that we can only do if there's a kind of an ID associated, or we're pulling in data confidentially but not necessarily anonymously. So that's just a little bit of additional context there. I see another question from Brian. What if we already have an employee climate survey? Could it sync up with the DEI metrics you have listed in the previous slide? Yes, definitely. I'm absolutely a proponent of using the data that you already have and building on top of that data side, especially because it gives you an opportunity to have a longitudinal view. So if you are already collecting information, I would absolutely recommend sort of using that to pulse check levels of inclusion in your company. Oftentimes we do find that if organizations are collecting certain data, that they will be missing metrics, but missing metrics is better than not having any metrics at all. And we can definitely provide, if you reach out, we're very happy to just provide some extra feedback on the sort of data that you're collecting. And how we could potentially, maybe some gaps that you have or whatever, like happy to do this for complimentary. And I would also say that just ensuring that you're also pulling in that demographic information in whatever fashion, it becomes really important, because a lot of the time the experiences of our underrepresented employees can be sort of obscured or overwhelmed by the group experience, because if our majority of our employees in the organization are having a fantastic time, and they're feeling very included, but our, I don't know, Indigenous employees are really having struggling when it comes to peer team building, or they're struggling when it comes to feeling valued, that will get obscured unless we're pulling in those demographics. It really is important to take a look at what are the differences in experience depending on your background or identity. How can organization capture, so someone else asked, how can organizations capture / measure product inclusion / accessibility? Great question. So not to kind of make a plug for a fellow company, but there's a company that we that is in this space that I think is really doing fantastic work, called Fable. They assist in basically testing products of organizations for accessibility. They do really great work, so I recommend you check them out. But if you want to do it yourselves internally, there are absolutely ways that you can test your products yourself. Like anything, you can work with us for data collection and processing, or you could do it yourself in the same way that you can test your products yourself for accessibility. A lot of the time, what I would recommend is almost using the resources that you have. So there's a lot of free online resources that make recommendations on how to test products internally. I've also seen organizations and companies even establish a kind of community of employees within their organization that might have accessibility needs, who can help test new products for whether or not they're accessible. Now, of course, this needs to be done well, in the sense that this needs to become part of their core job responsibilities. It's not like an add-on to the work that they're already doing, but this is a way that you can kind of engage with your employees and ensure that the products that you're putting out there are accessible. Of course, if you set it up well, in the sense that this is something that is like part of core job and compensated well. Any other questions? I know that we're a little bit over time. I'll wait like one more minute. Okay, well, it doesn't look like it, but it was a pleasure kind of speaking with all of you through the chat. I hope that this was helpful in some way, or at least interesting. And if you have other questions about your strategy or what you're working on, or if there's anything at all that we could help you with in an official or unofficial capacity, please reach out. We're all sort of fighting this good fight in the DEI space together, so we love to be collaborative. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.